This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and well-being hot topics with special guests from across Asia. Hi, my name is Jace Robles, and I'm the Director of DE&I at Community Business. I will be your podcast host for today's episode. Today's episode marks the launch of our exciting new partnership between Community Business and Radius Networks. This is a partnership that's very close to my heart because in my corporate stint as a DE&I professional, Community Business and Radius are really partner organizations that I hugely valued because my advocacy also started as a Pride Network leader. So now, united by a shared commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion across Asia, this collaboration leverages the strengths of both organizations to empower workplaces to be more inclusive and equitable. At the heart of our partnership is a belief in the transformative power of employee networks and resource groups. By equipping ERG or network leaders with practical tools, insights, and support, we're helping organizations embed a genuine sense of belonging, driving business success and sustainable change. Together, Community Business Network and Radius Networks are building a stronger ecosystem for inclusion where every employee can thrive. So today, I'm very excited to be speaking with Tim. Tim Macavoy is the head of product at Radius Networks. He has helped top global organizations develop their DE&I ecosystem, in particular, employee networks and their leaders for many years. Tim has a broad background in technology, media, and the arts, with previous UX design positions at Microsoft and Government Digital Service. He also has a practical experience of founding and leading diversity networks from universities to LGBTQ plus youth radio, Skype to Intertech Diversity Forum. Now, without further ado, Tim, welcome to the podcast. And for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work, could you share a little bit more about yourself, your background, and your passion for DNI?
Hi, Jays. Yeah, thank you for having me along. It's a delight. First of all, I would just say for anyone listening and not watching, I'm sitting on a roof terrace in the centre of the city of London because it's such beautiful sunshine. For those of you watching, look, it's not a fake background. This is real. Um, it was that or sit in a cupboard, and it didn't feel like a sitting in a cupboard kind of chat. So I hope if there's a bit of occasional background or plane going overhead, you'll forgive it for enjoying the atmosphere of the day. So my name's Tim. Radius has been around for about 16 years. We started in the UK, but now work globally, putting ERGs or employee networks. We use the terms interchangeably. Really at the centre of D&I or DEI efforts. I've been here about 8 years. It's the longest job I've ever had by far now, because prior to that I was somewhat transient, hopping between jobs and industries. I was always a do-gooder, I will say. I've always sort of been quite passionate about, joining forums and groups and networks and things that have something to do with treating people well and creating communities. But I have been through many different industries. So started out in the arts and the performing arts, which is what, in some ways, the performing arts is a very inclusive, liberal place to be in terms of cultural attitudes.
Yeah.
But actually, in terms of the way you get treated as an employee, as in, having rights and thinking about things like bias and working overtime and all sorts of things, it's terrible. So it's an interesting balance of DEI challenges in the arts. And it was through there that really I got into, as you say, LGBT youth radio, using some of my hosting skills. So that got me in turn into journalism, where I was mostly working in arts journalism, but occasionally I would get the odd interview with a politician or a company, a CEO or HR manager, and would always want to throw questions at them around diversity and inclusion and that sort of stuff. And that led me in turn from media into technology as a copywriter, then as a UX designer. And it was there that I really kind of got stuck into how networks really are for understanding people, making it part of the business, and how it can enhance your whole organization.
Quite an interesting journey from the arts to technology and now to employee networks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big believer that in everything you do, you should take all of your life experiences with you. I remember being interviewed for a job at Microsoft, and I'd left off all my kind of years of acting. And
Mhm.
the manager who was employing me was like, "Why have you just got a gap here? Like, what was it? Were you in prison?" And I was like, kind of no. I was like, "Well, no, it was acting, and I just didn't think it would like seem relevant to you at Microsoft working technology." And it was like, far from it.
Mm.
We value all of these skills and all of these experiences. So
Mm.
as random as it seems when you take a step back, when you zoom into every moment, it made sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that's all about bringing your best self to work, right? Bringing the most authentic you. So yeah, Tim, can you I know Radius has been doing a lot lately, but I know one of the things that you released recently is the ERG impact report.
Mhm.
Can you talk more about that, like some of the key findings and maybe things that you find particularly compelling?
Yeah. So, as I said, we've worked with organizations for years and years around the world. And when we talk to clients, we have a lot of anecdotal information to give them.
Yeah.
We say, oh, well, this company's been doing this, and when I was working with them, they do this. What we didn't have so much was a really condensed way to widely share some information about how brilliant employee networks and ERGs are, so that people could pick it up, quickly riffle through, see some key points, and then share it with other people who know even less.
Yeah.
So we wanted something that was very shareable, and obviously a report does that. It's free to download from our website, so please people do go radius-networks.org. You can see the full thing for yourself. But to give you a couple of highlights, we wanted some numerical data. We sent some surveys out. It was like over 1,000 organizations, I think we sent it out to, and conducted interviews in our own experience to try and interpret the data and turn it into a narrative. And some of the key things that came out is networks are growing, which is reassuring, not just in terms of the numbers of people joining a network, but the types of network as well. So, in some ways, it's brilliant because it has even more opportunities for people to find a network that they want to join. And networks are for everyone, they're not just about minoritized people, they can be for everyone to join. Um, of course, the challenge that comes with that is it makes the governance of them a little more
Yeah.
complicated. So we've been
Mhm.
working with bigger organizations to sort of try and rationalize the 100, 200 networks they have into some sort of structure where they all get equally or fairly supported, and they're
Mhm.
in some sort of umbrella structures that make
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
Um, we also found that networks are having a positive impact. 99% of our respondents, and we spoke to, members and leads of ERGs. We spoke to sponsors, executive sponsors. We spoke to HR leads. We spoke to all sorts of people in industries, but
Mm.
almost everyone agreed that they're having a positive impact
Mm.
and that they create cultural change. Also, that they are shaping EDI and business strategy.
Mm.
Um, an interesting point in the context of talking about Asia Pacific is that one of the biggest differences in responses from Asia Pacific came in terms of shaping EDI and business strategy.
Mm.
So, whereas we had our lowest mark from the Americas was 65% said it did,
Mm.
in Asia Pacific, we had about 85% say it did.
Mm. Mm.
So, much stronger sense that ERGs and employee networks can help you shape your strategies on the ground.
Yeah.
And we think part of the reason for that is that because because Asia is so diverse, so nuanced,
Yeah.
so many languages, it's
Mhm.
really important for the people who are working on the ground in business to be able to help land those strategies, which may have come from a global HQ, maybe
Yeah.
come from one country, and it's harder to interpret it unless you have those people going, I can help you with this because I understand how it works here. So that's a really big point for us. And the final one I'll just throw in, and then the rest you can read for yourself, is overwhelmingly people said it had enhanced their careers
Mm.
personally, being part of a
Mhm.
network. That was not just leading a network, which we fully
Mm.
expected because you learn so many
Mm.
skills
Mm.
being a network leader, but also the reach that you get from meeting people in different parts of the organization by being part of one. So
Yeah.
even just being a network member and even being a sponsor of a network said
Mhm.
that it enhanced their careers greatly. So that was wonderful to read.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I was just like going down memory lane during my times as an employee network leader. It's definitely a huge driver of development and opportunity to be able to connect with different people in the organization, because not only was I able to drive my advocacy and my passion, but I also was able to build um network with senior leaders, decision makers, and really drive business priorities. I know for a fact that some of the most successful employee networks, and I know you cover this in your development programs, so are those that really look at the end-to-end life cycle of talent. For example, from the time that they're hired to how they're retained and to how they develop and actually become an ambassador for their companies respectively, both as a network leader, and more. So it's definitely very good ground to develop in terms of your career. That said, you talked about Asia in the Asian context and how the results are kind of different. Do
Mm.
you have some unique challenges and opportunities that you find for ERG specifically in the Asia context, particularly any cultural nuances or organizational nuances or the like?
Um, yes, we do. I think I'll preface it by saying that, as someone who works in diversity and inclusion, I know full well that when we make assessments or perhaps stereotypes about different cultures or different regions, um, while they can be partly true on the whole when you take a step back, I also know that the differences between individuals within a culture is greater than between cultures. So I just want to preface it by saying I do realize that everyone's the same in every culture.
Yeah.
I don't constantly drink tea as an Englishman. I only have it 6 or 7 times a day. But but that said, I think there are some things that we do commonly see. One is around the communication style. So aside from the language diversity, which obviously
Yeah.
is huge in Asia, and language diversity can be a real challenge in diversity and inclusion because we have so many similar and different words
Yeah.
that get moved in and out all of the time. You're using one term in one place and then you discover that it means something completely different, or in another it's become taboo for some reason. And the challenge of translating terms that are so loaded is really
Yeah.
complicated. So I think in terms of language diversity, first of all,
Yeah.
what's important is to try and communicate your meaning as clearly as possible without relying on one word meaning the same to everyone. Understand that you might need to spend a bit of extra time discussing key terms and ask people, what is your understanding of that? How would you paraphrase it back to me?
Mhm.
We would call that active listening, of
Yeah.
being able to paraphrase things that people are saying.
Yeah.
And also just accept that there may be difference.
Mm,
So
mm,
I even have this between the UK and the US, for example, that there are terms we sometimes use that the US might even find offensive. And I
mhm.
think rather than assuming that everything's offensive and trying to align just to the one agreed culture, we can
Mhm,
sometimes accept that things are different in other cultures and let
mhm,
it be.
mhm,
Um, and on that note, I think another difference is the approach to confrontation and
mm.
open disagreement.
Yeah.
I would say in my experience, from what I've seen anyway, is that it's much more common in Western ERGs
Mhm,
for me to see open confrontation,
mhm,
disagreement, anger, even directed at HR, directed at sponsors. And,
mhm.
oftentimes we have to work with the whole team and say, you're on the same page here. You might have slightly different priorities or ways of communicating, but it's going to be better if we come together.
Yeah.
I find that happens a lot less in Asia Pacific, that there is open disagreement in that style. It's
Yeah.
more carefully phrased. I think there's
Mhm,
more of a whether the term is respect or hesitancy to speak to people who are more senior. And
Yeah.
so, the opportunity of that is it's great because there's, I think, a much deeper sense of respect often and a sense
Mm,
of community. But it can be a challenge to sometimes draw out some of the observations of what's not going well on the ground from people, which is where ERGs really thrive. It's by telling those stories that would otherwise go unheard. So
mm.
sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to draw that out. Um,
Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think kind of that also goes on to the nature of networks and the
Mm,
structure of them, is that hierarchy can differ in it quite a lot across the globe.
mm,
And I think, perhaps it's changing more with the modern age as people are so used to networked communication with social media, etc.,
mm,
online working. But I think networks thrive when there is less of a center of power.
mm,
Um, and that can apply to anywhere, that a chair of a network doesn't hold on to all the knowledge. They
mm.
don't do everything for themselves. The point
Yeah.
of a network, if we think of it in terms of technology, is you should be able to remove any single point of the network,
Yeah.
any
Mhm.
node, and it still works. It's the way
Yeah.
the brain works, right?
Yeah.
We can get a little bit of brain damage somewhere in the brain and it works around it.
Yeah.
And that's the structure we're really looking for, to make
Yeah.
it
Mm,
resilient and agile.
mm,
And when it turns into, a pyramid or a wheel with a
mm,
central
mm,
spoke or whatever it is,
mm,
I think it doesn't work as well. And
mm.
the sense of hierarchy, I think, can also be a challenge.
Yeah. This I definitely relate to that, Tim, because I did go through the radius development program. I think it was stage 2 at the time. And I was really relating to how the structures look like of successful ERGs, for example. And I remember at the time that I joined the employee network, we did have a chair. But then eventually we saw that maybe a co-leadership style would work better for the network, because in that way, any time that you become, for example, busy with your day job, your co-chairs can pick it up. And we also looked at how we can, for example, position quarterly recommitments, so that as you said, power is distributed. So and decision making can also be distributed in that sense.
Hmm.
I wanted to highlight how you mentioned hierarchy is very different really here. And how I think from a conscious standpoint, we would often make decisions and speak up as Asians. I mean, I'm not trying to generalize, but in the sense that um we're thinking about the collective impact of what we're going to say, as opposed
Yeah.
to, I guess, other cultures where there is a more individualistic approach to the responses or to confrontation even. And so I think while Asia is really vast and have its own drivers from a cultural standpoint, we do share that level of collectivism whenever we
Hmm.
would handle interactions within the networks and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be, a challenge in terms of speaking up sometimes, especially if you don't have many people like you around
Mm,
you.
yeah.
Which is, what ERGs is for, is to try and get people who have more similarities together to kind of form a bit more strength in collectivism. So it can also be a benefit, that sense of, well, we want to do this together. We want to include people and we want to do it in a respectful way. We don't just want to be an outsider protest group. So there's pros and cons, I think, to both of those cultural situations.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Speaking of, could you tell us more, Tim, about high impact ERGs? I know you're in the business of really creating high impact ERGs. What are some of the key characteristics of these employee networks, and how can organizations actually cultivate them?
Yeah. So this is a question really that we could talk forever about, because that
Yeah,
that
I
is the
know.
core of our business. And what I want to say first of all, I think, is it's different for everyone what high impact is, because it depends on the maturity of your organization, where your network is at, the skills you have, what's going on in the world. There are so many things that can change what your priorities and your approach should be. So with our training and development, we try not to be too prescriptive, for example. What we want to do instead is give inspiration, guidance, examples, exercises for you to put into your own context. I try to think of it much more like university learning, where you learn how to learn about the subject, as opposed to here's the steps you should follow to be successful, because that's just not a thing in this field. It's too varied and changeable. But I think some things that are very common that I'll go through, just to be practical as well, is making sure that your ERGs, your employee networks, are properly integrated with your D&I strategy. So make sure that the ERGs have a clear mandate from the business. They understand how they contribute to the broader D&I goals and also the organizational goals. I think it's really important to see them at the heart of the business rather than on the side. So you should look for where they're specifically mentioned in your strategy. They should have resources and support. Some of these things seem really obvious, but they're conversations we have all the time. So that includes potentially having dedicated budgets, having time for meetings, having some administrative support, whether that comes from the comms team or the D&I team, access to relevant training and development opportunities as well, whether that's us or someone else. So, providing support shows that it's a legitimate thing, right? The organization believes in it. We've seen it enhances careers. We know it has a positive impact on the organization. So organizations should be actively supporting it and not expecting people to just think of everything themselves. It's exhausting and it's not practical. Having an executive sponsor. This is also really important. And I would say, from my observations, even more so in Asia Pacific, having an executive sponsor. And it goes back to that thing about, the sense of hierarchy. When you've got someone more senior in the business saying, you can speak up, we believe in you, I'm going to also enhance your voice, it encourages a little bit more. But for everyone, having a sponsor is important because they have insight into the business that you don't have. They will be able to advise you on what strategically is going to be a priority and likely to pass. They can mentor you personally on leadership skills they've learned along the way. They can take your voice further than it otherwise would. I've got a few more. Goal setting and measurement. I think the most important thing about kind of setting a goal is just knowing what direction you're headed in, and also being able to pause regularly to say, are we heading in that direction? So I don't necessarily have specific metrics that you should follow. I'm not saying everyone should have X number of members or you should do this many events per year. I think that's sort of redundant to the mindset of, are we doing this purposefully, or are we just doing it because everyone else does an event? And have we paused afterwards before we move on to the next thing to go, what was the impact of that and could we have done it any better? Two more things I will say are really common to set you up for success. Collaboration. Work with the other ERGs. Don't do things on your own, because you'll all be creating stuff that you can use across the network. So don't create them 7 times, create them once and share them and adapt them. Share your best practices with each other, share your resources. And, perhaps I'll put a pin in that to talk about intersectionality in a moment, but on a practical level, collaborating with each other means you have less work to do, which is always a bonus when you're in an ERG. And finally, and actually in our report, this is the thing we found was kind of ranked the lowest or the most negatively that people were not doing. Everyone else was really super positive. This was the one that were like, we don't think this is going very well, is recognizing and celebrating success, which is a shame because ERGs are doing amazing things all over the place, and they're not pausing long enough to, I think, acknowledge their successes, to take time to celebrate them, raise the visibility of what you're doing, and also kind of the opportunities of being in an ERG committee. Sometimes when I talk to leaders, they don't want to celebrate their own success because they think it's like too egotistical. It's like blowing their own horn. They think they're just doing it for the common good. And what I have to say to them is, there are people out there who don't know what you do. And this is part of your brand building. It's
Yeah.
part of going, look at the opportunities you have if you come along, if you contribute, what you
Mm.
can learn, that sense of achievement you can feel. So it's important for the sustainability of your network, for your resilience, for your succession planning, to
Yes.
celebrate as much as possible your achievements.
Yeah, that reminds me of what we call, when this was still a term, the FOMO energy, or fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
When we do anything for the network, we would make sure that, like, we post it in the group chat, that people see what we did, and it's actually more. It's more about showing the world the impact that we're driving, but at the same time, that's also speaking to the personal eminence of those people leading the employee network. So I
Yeah.
definitely relate to that. Um, so Tim, another thing, the report touches on the importance of collaborating with others, and you mentioned it earlier, right? How to
Mm-hmm.
address intersectional issues, for example. Can you give more examples on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just quickly, for anyone who's not super familiar, we use the term intersectionality a lot. It means when you have intersecting identities, like, let's say, for example, you are a Black disabled woman, you might find there are certain things that you face that just a Black woman wouldn't, or a disabled woman wouldn't, or just a woman wouldn't. There are unique kind of oppressions. Now, we can go into where that comes from legally, but we're not going to do that today. What we're going to talk about is what it practically means for ERGs, for networks. And what it means is resisting a single identity. So people might think you just deal with one topic in your network because that's what they've seen in the headline. You're a disability network. So perhaps you are only for people in wheelchairs, as opposed to, the plethora of disabilities or access needs or neurodiversity that it could cover. Um, so, for one thing, it's about resisting a single narrative and showing that really almost anything can come into your network and be part of it. It makes it more inclusive, it makes it more inviting. But what it most often means is networks collaborating with each other to discover what those stories are, those intersectional opportunities. So that's why, as networks, we need to put most of our effort into collaborating with other ERGs when it comes to things like events and panel discussions and calendar days. So yes, host joint events and initiatives. I think be aware of what you want to achieve and how your audiences interact with each other. Some are very used to interacting, some are not so used to interacting. So you might need to hold people's hands a little bit, think about how you create those inclusive conversations, do a bit of myth busting. You absolutely should be sharing resources and best practices. So perhaps, as an example, you have collaborated on a guide to allyship that all the networks can share. What does it mean to be an ally to your network? You can all have a common approach to that and collaborate. Have you got joint training programs? So I do think that if one of your ERGs is going to go on a training development program, you might as well all go on it, because then you're speaking the same language. If you do separate training, you may kind of learn different terms and different approaches, which
Yeah.
take extra time to explain to each other.
Mhm.
So if you take the same approach, it means you've already got a common language that you're speaking. I think do
Mhm.
be aligned on your strategic goals. So there will be things that come from the DNI strategy, which, let's say, it's about addressing the workplace environment. All of your ERGs can do something towards that, and it means that you kind of create that synergy of conversation. Make sure you can communicate with each other practically, like you're using the same channels, whether it's Slack or Teams or Trello or whatever it is. You've got a common collaboration space. Now, to you and I, coming from tech, that seems very common sense. But there are a lot of organizations out there, I can tell you, that do not do this. They all communicate in their own way. They do
Mhm.
it through private WhatsApp groups, and it's
Yeah.
it's you just go, wow, okay. Um, and what can also be really useful, it depends on the size of your organization, the number of ERGs you have, but it's to establish some sort of cross ERG council or committee, a forum where they can all be represented and meet regularly to share updates, discuss their common challenges, identify opportunities for collaboration. Most commonly, that means the chairs meeting, once a month or once every 3 months or whatever it is, with the EDI team, and they all just get a bit of alignment going on. But it's better if you can find some opportunity for you all to come together periodically just to share what's going on and look for those opportunities than be off in your own silo.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And not to mention, we can also always make it fun, right? And we have to make sure that we have fun while we're doing that. I remember one of our golden years was when we did the strategic planning with all of the different employee networks or the business resource groups. And we did
Mm-hmm.
it on a Saturday. We rented a resort. We did the agile and design thinking training, but at the same time did an ideation on what we can do for the following year. And then after that, swam and drunk together. So it was fun. And then at the same time, the following year, because we did all that, almost every month we would have different events. We would be supporting each other. And like you said, right, leverage on each of your strengths. For example, there was a network whose strength was hosting. So they would be doing the hosting for the different events, and there was a network member whose strength is on logistics or procurement, for example. So for all of
Yeah,
the different events throughout the different networks, there were some merch, for example, that can be given to all attendees. So,
yeah.
like I said, this is definitely a trip to memory lane for me. But I guess to wrap up, them not to be also very considerate of the current climate,
Mm-hmm.
with in the face of the backlash when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do you think can ERGs or employee networks be engaged to continue and sustain the progress towards inclusive workplaces in these trying times?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree with you. I think keep it fun. Uh, so I know it can be really serious business, and there are times when the outside world gets to you in the workplace. But I think remember that like people also go there to that space for some support and some respite. Like they don't necessarily want to hear the same narratives they're hearing from the media or even from friends and family in this space. They want to envision a positive future and a brighter space and enjoy themselves at work. So don't feel like it's your job as an ERG or as an ERG lead to constantly focus on fixing the negative. It's just as important to paint a rosy picture of the future. Otherwise, if we can't work towards what we can't envision, right? So that's really important. Um, I think in terms of using terms like the DI backlash, it's not universal. It's getting a lot of press because of specifically, think everything that's going on in the US. I will say, in specifically the past couple of weeks have been really hard in the UK because we had a ruling from the High Court that one of our equality laws, which relates to protection of sex discrimination, doesn't apply to trans people. And that was a real shock to a lot of people in our community. Um, it shows that you can't be complacent about things like legal protections. You must always fight for them, even when they're there.
Mhm.
But this isn't the case in every country. It's a bit of a roller coaster. Protections, they come and go. Cultural attitudes as well. I'm not seeing that backlash in every country, and I'm not seeing it from every industry or every business. For every business, that has supposedly announced a rollback of D&I, I've seen businesses that have recommitted to it. I've seen several companies in this country at the moment lose contracts because they have not reinforced their commitment to D&I, and other companies have gone, well, we are, so we're not working with you anymore. So I think find the other side of the story that perhaps a lot of the media isn't necessarily saying. And I think especially, for Asia Pacific, you are your culture is not dictated by what's going on in the US. So don't let that be the story. You've got so many other great stories to tell, and they're more important. So I would say that. As an extension of that, I think stay grounded in data and facts. There is a lot of misinformation out there. Um, go and find what the truth is. Find those studies. There are thousands of studies about the effectiveness of diversity and inclusion in general, and some of the ERGs that we're starting now out there that you can rely on. We don't need to keep proving it over and over again. You can go to those trusted studies and use them and reiterate them to show the positive impact of the work. So stick to the facts when things get troublesome. It also prevents you from getting too overwhelmed with emotion as well, right? Because it's a very emotive thing. If someone asks you a question that you feel is really challenging your identity, your values, your beliefs, return to the facts first of all. Go, all right, let's establish what the truth is before I bring my own story and my own emotion into this. I think continuing to highlight business impact, continuing to highlight inclusive practices, as I've said a few times. ERGs are for everyone. Networks are for everyone. There's nothing exclusive about it. There's nothing discriminatory about it. There's nothing unfair about the chances we're offering people. It is for everyone. So, if you think it's not for everyone, get involved and find out. And I think during this time, as I said, I'll just say one more time, remember to maintain your brand. So when people look at you, are there people who think it's an exclusive club? Are there people who think all you do is complain? Let's address that. Let's find ways to make sure we're communicating those truthful, positive stories about what it is you actually do. And I think that's the best way to engage the battle. It's not to necessarily get into a fight, but it's to show the pathway to a happier future.
Thank you so much, Tim. That's such a great way to wrap up today's session. Thank you so much for being a guest at our Up for discussion. And I look forward to the wonders that community business and Radius networks will continue to do together in this partnership in Asia Pacific. Once more, thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much to everyone, to all our audience who stay tuned in today's Up for Discussion episode. Until the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for listening to CB Up for Discussion. For more information about our work across Asia, head to the Community Business website.